Florida State avoids a massive disaster as they narrowly beat Boston College 31-29, a 2-point victory over a team that should have been put away soundly by the third quarter. There's a lot to unpack here: questions, answers, frustrations. We're going to talk about what went wrong, some reasons why, some bright spots that may have been missed in Saturday's game, and why you shouldn't panic just yet. In a nutshell, the offensive line didn't play great. Jordan Travis went down and was seen in a sling after the game. Hoping that part is just precautionary because he did finish out the second half. But that's a big storyline to keep an eye on this week. Jaheim Bell got dinged up a little bit. The running game looked plain. Trey Benson has not looked like our best running back at all this season. Play calling was weird and super vanilla at times. Jordan Travis wasn't particularly sharp. Now, despite this, you did put up 31 points on the road in less than ideal weather. But the defense, good lord, the defense played a terrible game. It looked as if they watched no film on Castellanos. I get mobile quarterbacks always give us fits, but we made this guy look like Malik Cunningham on Saturday, and that's just ridiculous. There was blown contains, blown coverages. They converted way too many third and long situations. They even had I want to say 3rd and 19 that was converted just because they let the quarterback run wild. It was incredibly frustrating, to say the least, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. I know it looked really bad, and it was. And it's certainly not a performance that reflects a top 3 team ranking. But I'm going to ask you guys to pause, zoom out a little bit, and take a look at the grand scheme of things, because perspective and reality is super important here. For starters, we got the dub. We won. Granted, it was so ugly, but take a look at the other top teams from this week. I mean, Texas had themselves a game in the fourth quarter against Wyoming. Michigan didn't look great against Bowling Green. Georgia was losing to South Carolina for a good bit. Alabama was tied 3-3 with USF for most of the game, actually. The media favorite Colorado even went into 2 overtimes against a bad Colorado State team. So it wasn't just Florida State that had issues this past weekend. Now all those teams, including Florida State, pulled out the win, so there is that. There's a whole laundry list of issues and things that could have caused this kind of performance. To start, you were missing a few key guys. On offense, you were down 2 starting offensive linemen in Robert Scott and Maurice Smith. Both guys were absent in this game. And on the defensive side of the ball, you were without starting safety Akeem Dent. I say what you want about Dent, but he is a veteran player in a very young safeties room. I think if he's on the field yesterday, you see a little bit less blown coverages and just a more disciplined defense overall, if that makes any sense. Now, to that point, I think at least Scott and Smith were held out for more precautionary reasons, basically resting them to have them available for Clemson. So hopefully we just have all 3 guys back this weekend before going into Death Valley. I think the bigger issue here is they still should have beat Boston College easily, even being down a few guys. So let's talk about what else went wrong and why we didn't do that. Now, there's a lot of intangibles here, and as hard as it is to assess, the intangibles do matter and they play a role here. To start, it sounds like the team was having issues with the flu or maybe COVID going on in the locker room, or the whole campus maybe. And this was seemingly confirmed by Kalen DeLoach's dad on Twitter. I also seen a post saying that a few key players were actually on IVs up until game time. I don't know how true that is, and I'm definitely not trying to make any excuses, but that could point to at least a part of the problems from the other day. The other thing is, as down as BC may be right now, it's still a road game, a conference road game at that. But then you also factor in the weather issue. Hurricane Lee was initially expected to impact that area pretty rough on Saturday morning. But there were still some winds and some light rain, so it still wasn't quite ideal weather. The other side of this is that a lot of us were wondering if this game was even going to be played. Was it going to get canceled, rescheduled, moved to a bye week, moved to the night before? So if we were unsure, it's fair to say that the team and staff were a little bit as well. Now, of course, they should be more than prepared to beat this Boston College team in the middle of a snowstorm if it came down to it. But the uncertainty of the game could have at least caused a bit of a hiccup in their focus. It was also Boston College's Red Bandana game, which is a really cool week where they honor a former player who was a volunteer firefighter during 9/11 and was killed after saving over a dozen people before the towers collapsed. So they were playing a bit inspired, riled up for the rivalry game, for the conference game. So you got to add that in as well. It's also important to consider the fact that this team may have got caught looking ahead to Clemson next week. It could have just been completely not focused on this game. Now, I would hope this team was mature enough to not do that at this point with how many veteran leaders you have on that team. But they are human, so it's definitely possible. Again, I don't like that answer, but, it makes you wonder. Now, I know Clemson looks a lot less difficult than it did preseason. They've fallen out of the top 25. It's not going to quite be that top 10 matchup like a lot of us had initially thought. But that game is still incredibly big for this team. It's massive. The implications it has, despite their rankings. Florida State hasn't beaten Clemson since 2014. The only player on the whole team who even knows what it's like to beat Clemson is Jaheim Bell, and that's because he transferred from South Carolina after they beat Clemson last year. So the Clemson game is huge for the team, the program, Mike Norvell. Just with all the success and hype, I can see everyone, staff included, a little anxious and eager looking ahead to that Clemson game. On top of all that, it just seems that Boston College is always kind of a weird or tough game for us. Historically, if you go back and look at the scores, it's actually usually a tight game outside of like the 2022 season or the 2017 year. 2021, we won 26-23. 2019, it was 38-31. 2018, it was 22-21. 2017, they blew us out 35-3. 2015 was 14-0. 2014 was 20-17. Even the 2013 team had a semi-tight game with them winning 48-34. Now, that's not to say that this team we played on Saturday was anything close to the level of those Boston College teams mentioned before. There's no Steve Adazio, there's no Matt Ryan, there's no A.J. Dillon shredding our defense. But still, and for the record, I do think that Castellanos kid they have at quarterback is actually going to be a very good player. So, injuries, weather, the flu, a possible look-ahead game against a very inspired team who's also rejuvenated with a new change at quarterback. All on the road against a conference opponent who historically plays us close and in the middle of just a super odd week of college football in general. I think it's easy to see how it's almost a perfect storm of things that could have, when you combine them all, could have caused a rough day like this. That being said, I think it's a good sign that they still pulled out the win, especially because if you look back, Taggart's team loses that game by 21 points easy. Last year's team may even lose that game in that scenario. Had a lot of kind of trappy NC State game kind of vibes. And I'm also glad it happened here, right before Clemson, rather than during Clemson. I think it taught this team that they have to stay hungry and realize there's a target on their back. And if they slip for even a second, everything they're striving for, everything they're trying to accomplish right now, it could just come to a crushing end like that. I think and hope it was a good wake-up call to make the team stay hungry. It gave the staff a ton to coach on. I'm going to choose to be the optimist here, and I try to in general, but I do think this team actually comes out against Clemson much sharper than what we saw on Saturday. Maybe even sharper than they would have if they had blown out Boston College like they were supposed to. As long as these injuries aren't anything serious, I think the Noles go up to Clemson focused, ready for the challenge, and I still predict a big win there. That being said, I do want to acknowledge some of the brighter spots in the game that maybe got a little overshadowed by the final score and the poor game. For one, DJ Lundy has turned into a sort of Swiss Army knife for Florida State. He had a rushing touchdown and a really nice one-handed interception. He's also looked pretty good all season so far, really. He's had a few really good tackles for losses, a nasty sack in the LSU game. I think we'll see more of that out of him as the season goes on. But also, Johnny Wilson seems to have maybe got his act together a little bit. I don't think he had any real drops in the game against Boston College. Maybe one, I have to go back and double check, but he definitely looked better overall and still hauled in over 100 receiving yards. So he seems to have worked some things out, and you hope to see that continue, especially heading into the Clemson game. Jaheim Bell looked really good. He had a really nice touchdown catch and got robbed of another one, in my opinion. But really liked what I see from him in this game. He did seem to be a bit shaken up at one point late in the game, so hopefully it's nothing serious, and we'll see him back on the field this weekend as well. Now, one more player I'm going to mention, Azareye'h Thomas. He's actually looked decent so far this season, and you can even tell he's put on some weight and he's kind of getting into that true college form. Now, the one play from our defense that seemed to work a little bit on Saturday was corner blitzes, and AZ was in on those a good bit, including one play where he just laid the lumber on the BC player. I don't remember if it was the quarterback or the running back. I think at this point he may look a little bit better than Fentrell Cypress, and I think we see him cement himself as a true starting corner by the end of the season. So despite a really underwhelming performance for the Noles, you still got to win, and it don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning. The Noles did, in fact, get the win. I still had several bright spots throughout the game, and are left with a lot to coach on and prep for the Clemson game. Just got to get healthy, clean up some stuff, remain focused and hungry, and head into Clemson, pick up another win. The first win against Clemson since 2014, and hopefully go on and go 12-0 and clinch your ticket to the college football playoff. Because, yes, that is still possible even after a bad game. It's just a bad week, I think. There's no reason to overreact to it. You have them. The 2019 LSU team had scares. The 2013 team had a few close games. It's college football. It happens. But let me know what you guys think. Did we clean up and still take care of business in Death Valley, or are you concerned after what we saw this past weekend? Let me know in the comments, and let's talk Noles.